audience this morning on Sunday, August 29th, 2021. Really excited to be able to be here, and again, a good morning to those of you who are with me in person and around campus on our live stream, closed circuit TV. So, I had the privilege of speaking on Tuesday evening to a subset of the patient population, and ironically, then I looked at my calendar of topics for chapel, and I realized that they're basically the same topic. So I apologize to those of you who have heard some of this material, but it was actually good because I got a jump start on thinking about this on Tuesday night, and then since Tuesday to Sunday, I've had more time to reflect. The subject for today's chapel service has to do with honesty. And those of you who may be familiar with the recovery traditions, I should say, there's a bunch of them. The first of what I would call a recovery tradition was Alcoholics Anonymous, started in the 1930s with Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith, and today still is an anchor and an evidence-based form of support for you and for those of us who are seeking to find our way out of the hell of active addiction. Anyway, Bill and Bob, the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, began their movement, and there were people who were suddenly finding themselves capable of sustaining abstinence, of sustaining recovery, and experiencing this whole wonderful new beginning. And they were motivated not only to try and spread the message of how it worked to one another, but believed in fact that it was in spreading the message that they would sustain their own recovery. And so in 1939, when there were perhaps 100 people in the movement and they were succeeding in staying sober, there had been 300 or 400 that had been around, and but not everybody had it stuck with. So those first 100 were part of a editorial kind of community, and Bill Wilson drafted the opening text, which is still very important for those of us who are learning about staying sober, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And sorry to get so teachy here for a second, but anyway, in the big book of AA, if you don't know, it's a mother text, it's an text, it's a thing that's worth looking at. Even if you're going to use recovery dharma or smart recovery or some other sort of method to sort of stay sober, I would argue it's classic literature. And just like in medicine you might learn about pasteurization, or in geometry we learn about Euclid, in addiction recovery we learn about Bill Wilson and the AA Big Book. And it's an interesting document. It's a sort of a first of its kind in terms of being a manual for recovery. And the other programs like Narcotics Anonymous and Smart Recovery and Recovery Dharma, and other ones that you may know, interestingly clone themselves off of this, and their founding literature often looks a lot like the AA Big Book in its structure. So there's prefatory material, there's an exposition of the story of the founder and the program of recovery, and then there are testimonies at the back. That's kind of how the Big Book is structured. And then there are appendices as the editions of the book sort of accumulate. And honesty is shouted out both in the prefatory material and in the appendices of the AA Big Book. And it doesn't mean it's not central throughout. It absolutely is. But it's interesting because the doctor's opinion, which is one of the prefatory sections, and we'll call it a chapter, has HOW. Some of you have heard that acronym: honesty, open, and willing. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And then the spiritual experience appendix has them not in that order. It's not taught as an acronym at that point. But anyway, honesty was thought to be important by the founders of AA. And it might be self-evident. I certainly think those of us, those who know us in our active addiction, like our loved ones and our bosses and our friends or erstwhile friends, would say that honesty is an issue because they see us as very dishonest people. And that's because, unfortunately, in order to sustain addiction, in almost every case, it becomes tragically necessary to start hiding the truth about what's going on. And you might be hiding it in terms of the money, you might be hiding it in terms of the quantity, you might be, I heard a great speaker once, a famous patron of Alcoholics Anonymous, Father Joe Martin, who started Father Martin's Ashley, now called Ashley, a treatment center in Maryland. Joe was talking about his own sobriety, how he owned a farm, and he was a priest, but his family had inherited a farm, and he had lived on the farm and was, like lost in his alcoholism. And as he got sober, he would go into the little town there in Havre de Grace, Maryland, and people would go, the people that bought the farm would see him in the store and they go, "Hey Joe, we found another one," because they would find bottles hidden in trees around the thing and in the back of the barn and all that stuff. So none of us have ever hidden anything, right? I probably don't need to belabor the point. It is characteristic, I think, of the illness to be to be moved or forced in a way in order to protect the addiction to start not telling on ourselves. And if you are in this room or in this audience and you did not hide, cheat, lie, minimize, or deceive, you are by far the exception. It is just, and if you have shame about how you've lied, join the club. I have terrible shame about my deception. But don't lie about the lying, because that will just then you're digging the hole deeper. So can we just be honest that we were dishonest? And think about it for a minute as we think about this on a Sunday morning at Caron, here where you're rescued out of the grind of it and invited to contemplate whether and how you will make a profound turn in your life. And so, as I said, between Tuesday and Sunday, I had some new thoughts about the subject of honesty, and I want to talk about them before I talk about the other things that are on my little agenda here. The new thought that I got, which makes me sad, but it's really important to say, is that I realize that there's a piece of what drives our dishonesty that is fundamental. And it's another thing that Bill Wilson, in his weird accuracy, clued in on. Even though he was not a mental health professional and not a philosopher and not a spiritual practitioner. But honestly, there's just some gems in that founding literature. And one of the gems I'm talking about is the emphasis that he places on fear. He says that fear is a driving principle in human life anyway, which it certainly is. And I think that fear and honesty's connection is worth thinking about for a second. Because I think that what makes people lie, in a general sense, largely has some fear connected to it. So let's suppose I'm lying to gain something, like to steal your money or whatever. You could say, well, that's not a fear-driven lie, except in another sense it is, because I must have a fear that I'm not going to be all right unless I get the money that I steal from you. So if I'm lying to obtain something, then I have a fear if I don't obtain it that I won't be all right. The flip side is, what if I'm lying to deceive? What if I'm lying to hide something? Well, then clearly I'm afraid of disclosure. So in either case, either because I want something, then I'm fear that I don't have enough, or because I'm trying to protect myself from something, then the fear is right there. So fear drives dishonesty. And what kinds of fear are present in our population? Well, one of the kinds of fear that is something that those of us at Caron have been learning to pay greater attention to over the evolution of the program of recovery that we sort of try to help people to initiate is trauma. And so many of our patients have experienced horrible incidents or developmental wounds. Even you could think of multi-generational inherited trauma. If you are a person who grew up in a world where in your culture and context there's the remembrance of, say, for example, like one of my dear friends, Holocaust or whatever. And so what happens if you have been beat down, abused, tormented, violated, if those kinds of profound injuries have happened either directly to you or you have seen a ton of them because you have been a medic at war or a first responder in rough neighborhoods, or your family remembers being getting out of concentration camps, that memory of this horribleness of how bad life is can cause one to be reluctant to trust. When you have been pushed and beaten, and then somebody like Reverend Jack naivete is the other side of this. So naivete is Jack, and my wife would tell you I'm the most naive dude, in spite of evidence to the contrary that I shouldn't be. But I'm so grateful. I think it's a gift in my life that somehow I preserved some idiotic and purist naivety. I always want to believe that the good is there in people, and I just like see, oh, I love that person, and they're so good. And my wife is like, they're a monster, Jack. And I'm like, yeah, but maybe not. You know, like, or to think about what happened that made them be that way. And that's my point, is that unfortunately, and this happens for us in the clinical environment. So in fact, I shared on Tuesday night that maybe a couple of years ago, we had some new technology for the auditorium. Marty will remember this. And we had a new iPad tablet, he's using one there. And we came in one Sunday morning and it was missing. And I got indignant. I'm like, oh my God, can you believe somebody stole our tablet? And somebody else said, yeah, can you believe an addict stole something? So, my point is that maybe the dishonesty that is associated with this we can have compassion for because it's wound-driven. It's not that we wake up in the morning and we go, I want to be a lying cheat and a person who other people will demean. But it's because we're scared. And it's hard to take a risk. And what if I put myself out there and you don't accept me? Elena, I'm going to pick on her. She came in this morning and she's like, I want to do a song, but she was terrified. Thank you for not beating her up, right? It's really important that she braved a risk of attempting to, like, share her musical capacities, and she found out that she could do that here and not have somebody hold a placard at the back with some number, which, by the way, is awesome. So, as motivated as you might be, out of fear and wounding, to steal or lie, like deceive, it is incumbent upon me to point out two consequences that come from that are of such urgency. And I point them out on the 29th of August, with in mind that tonight I'm speaking at an event in anticipation of Tuesday, the 31st of August, is International Overdose Awareness Day. So I don't know if you knew that, but it's an event, it's a sad event. Why do we need a holiday for this? Because thousands and thousands of people have died. And I think there are some suicides that should have been counted as overdoses that are accidental. I think there are some overdoses that should be counted as suicides. But I think if you combine overdose and suicide, and think about that, like when I talk to you about what dishonesty is doing, I want you to hear, if you will, my plea that you understand the gravitas, the absolute seriousness of the situation you face. I sometimes enjoy kind of going off about this, but this is not a spa. This is not a place where you should be worried about whether the soup meets your criteria for good quality of, right? This is not a place where you should, like, think that because your roommate snores, like, that's a deal breaker and you're done with treatment, because I would encourage you to think about this as a situation of such medical urgency that its intention is to prevent you from being another statistic on the suicide and overdose list. And I always equated to when I was going through cancer treatment in 2008 to 2014. I had 6 years of ongoing cancer treatment. And I went far away. I would drive to New York every week for chemotherapy treatments. I had 5 surgeries on my bladder, no fun. I loved the doctors at Columbia. They were awesome, but I will tell you, like, the the equivalent of BHTs and the furnishings and the number of times I sat with a smock with my ass hanging out on a vinyl chair, and I'm like, really? This is what Columbia medical care looks like? But I didn't use it as an excuse to leave because I was terrified that I was gonna, right in the middle of that, one of my dear friends I got sober with died of bladder cancer and asked me to do his funeral. And it was a message for me that even though I had friends who were telling me I should do alfalfa smoothies and that would fix my bladder, because I hang out with this hippie spiritual crowd. And they're like, lemon oil and alfalfa, Jack, that's what you need. And meanwhile, my doc was saying, no, tuberculosis, germ, and interferon is what you need. Which one did I pick? I picked the harder road. And I want to ask you to think about that. Are you covering up here and trying to skate through? That's the key question of the honesty thing. Are you covering up here and trying to skate through and get your 28-day check mark to satisfy someone, something, some requirement, and not wanting it to be any harder than it needs to be to get your little, okay, you did it, at the risk of having me get an email that this alumni has passed away from suicide or overdose, and Jack, will you call the family? Because that's part of my job. So, I've gone way ahead to the end of the point, but let me go back for a second and talk about the two things I wanted to say. The two things that I think could help motivate you to understand why you would not do this, besides death, are first of all, loneliness. And I don't know that it's obvious, but this is a true, deep consequence of dishonesty. Is that if I don't share with you who I really am, then when you say you like me, I know that you are liking a fake or a partial, right? So I'm like, yeah, you like me, but if you knew, like in the extreme that I just stole the money from your wallet while you weren't looking, then you would not think I was such a great fellow, right? And so, in fact, I'm looking at Ken because he's a great guy and he's one of our celebrants today. So if Ken says, Jack, you're awesome, and I've been faking Ken out about something, I experience shame instead of the positive accolade that is supposed to make me, his intention in saying, Jack, you're awesome, is to make me feel good, which is what love is about, right? Love is about dopamine upregulation. It's about warmth and nurture and it's like, mommy, will you kiss it and make it better? That's what we need, this warm fuzzy in order to deal with life's crap. But unfortunately, if I have a secret that you don't know and you tell me that you love me, I am liable to not be able to receive your love in the way it's intended. And that, loneliness is barely enough of a deep word for it. Because what it means is that you become, and the worse it gets, the more you spin this web of lies and deception, the lonelier you become. Because nobody really knows that you, and so that people are like, I think you did a great job on that. And you're like, oh, God, I can't believe you said that, right? Instead of oh, thanks. That makes me feel so good that you, appreciated me. And, some of us have bad approval-seeking issues, myself among them, but the thing I'm trying to say is that it's the deception that makes it impossible for you to feel the positive outcomes of nurturing community. And the other thing that is really important to say is, and I use this on Tuesday, so I apologize again for the repeat, but is that if you are seeking some counsel and advice, which I hope you are, because it's an old AA truism, your best thinking gets you here, right? So if you are not open-minded at all, that's the open-minded side of the open-minded and willingness. If you are seeking some kind of advice from your significant other, from your peers, from the spiritual care staff, from your counselor, from the psychologist, from the psychiatrist, from medicine, from your, from your parents or your guru or your whomever, here's the problem. If you don't tell them where you are, it's like a GPS. Then they can't give you good direction. Because suppose you say, well, the only problem I have is alcohol. I came here for 28 days and I haven't had haven't had a drink, but you have a major, like either shopping, spending, gambling, sex, or benzodiazepines, something that we don't know. And people tell me this all the time. I don't want to say this because you're going to recommend more treatment. Yeah. And that would be like, this is my favorite example, is if I have a melanoma ear and I have a similar mole up here under my arm, and the doctor says, well, that's a melanoma and they're deadly, and I'm pretty sure I can cut it out and I'm pretty sure you're good, we're going to check and make sure, and I don't go, dude, what about this? I'm being very unwise. Because I'm letting the doctor treat the presenting form of the illness rather than treating the real issue. So not only do you have the loneliness factor, so as a spiritual being, you are like in this prison of your own creation because you've had to spin these web of lives out of self-protection. But the flip side is nobody can give you the right directions to get out of the spot you're in unless you dime out yourself and tell the darn truth. Like, spill your guts and let us know what's really going on, because I can promise you that Phil and Jack and Dave and Ken and the others who are here, who come here and wear our name badges, did not come in here because of the staggering amounts of money we make or something like that. We came in here because our prayer is that we can be of help to you. And so I get it that trust is an issue, and here I am saying, trust me, but honestly, I don't know what else to do but say this is the dilemma that we face. And I honestly, sadly believe that something like half of the phone calls I make to alumni who didn't make it, one of the pieces is insufficient information. You sort of know this, right? Have you ever been affected by a suicide? It's awful, right? Or an overdose. And you're like, God, I wish they had told me they were struggling, right? So this is not just a minor little suggestion. This is life and death. This is make it or don't make it. This is thrive or perish. This is flourish or despair. And it's a thing that you have power over. Which is so important because many of the things that we try and do are awesome, and that's the thing that we can do. We can try and provide a safe environment, we can try and encourage you, we can visit the context, we can open the consequences group, we can make all the chemistry there. But the leap that is on your plate is to decide to speak the truth. So, I happen to be trained in the Christian tradition, and there's a beautiful text, we won't hear it read today, but it's often quoted in human civilization. The truth will set you free. I deeply believe that. And it will make you capable of being loved as who you are, rather than who you want us to think you are. That's an old Father Bill. Father Bill used to say that all the time. And he, as I've told you before, he was just on it with key things. If you will tell us who you really are and let us love you as who you are instead of who you think we want you to be, then we are on the road to the change in your life that will open up new doors beyond what any of us could see. So I hope that stirs up a little something in a couple of you, and I hope it makes you feel brave if you've already taken the risk. And if you're already doing it, you're doing the right thing. And I'm proud of you for that. So here we go, into the rest of our service. Thanks.